Welcome to episode number 5 of LIFEBEAT, Conversations with Purposeful Women. I always forget to mute my other computer, sorry. I am your host, Lizzie Wan, and this show is part of Puna Press Live, and I am on the author roster for Puna Press. They published a book of my poetry. It's called The Hospice Bubble and Other Devastating Affirmations. Before we get started, I like to make a personal statement. Black Lives Matter. Science is real. Please wear your mask and social distance and wash your hands. Get your vaccine when you can. Women's and LGBTQ rights are human rights. And where I sit right now, I am on Keech or Tongva land. Before I get started with introducing my guests, I like to read a poem to start off. And usually I read a poem from my book. But today I'm going to read something I wrote recently, last week actually. So I wrote it on January 14th, so please keep that in mind when you hear the number. This is called A Start to Grieving. Let's begin with the number, 389,000. If we had a minute of silence for each life taken in this disease's inaugural year, we'd be silent for 270 days. Imagine that world of quiet. Through winter snow blanketing fields, through spring blooming riotous with color, through summer heat shimmering like stage curtains. This hush could be welcome. Block out din of our leaders, reduce televised clamor for attention, thwart calls of insurrection. Think of what you would hear instead. Snowflakes bouncing against each other, a soft, imperceptible thud as they land on your tongue. Rasp of a seedling breaking through soil, how it turns toward sunlight, faintly sighs under its shine, slow opening creak of each flower's bloom. Undeniable crack of dawn before temperatures soar so high you hear mercury expanding to push itself up, iridescence chiming until twilight. As autumn draws near, our silence coming to an end, we will remember those things, those new things we heard. Honor those who left us by mindfully bringing speech back to our throats. Whisper away grievances we had. Talk about what good there is left to do. Holler love we have for each other. And oh, how we will sing. All right. Deep breath. And now I'd like to introduce my guests. First, we have Delia Arancibia. You could wave, let everybody know who you are. Delia is an assistant principal in the National School District where she's had various roles for the last 18 years that we'll get into. She's a wife and mom to 2 girls, ages 13 and 10, who she prioritizes over everything else, and she is based in Bonita, California. We have Dr. Poppy Fitch. She is the current Director of Disability Support Programs and Services for the San Diego Community College District. She has also served in various roles at other institutions, and she helped found the San Diego Women's March. She is based in San Diego. And Dr. Charlita Shelton is a Marine Corps veteran who is the special consultant to the president at Gonzaga University. Her prior roles include interim associate chief diversity officer, also at Gonzaga, and before that, president and CEO of University of the Rockies, among others. She is based in Spokane, Washington. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie.
So we're going to start off with a lightning round of questions, I like to call it, and so you'll each have a chance to answer. And then after the lightning round, we'll focus on each of you, okay? So the first question is, when it is safe to travel freely again, where do you want to go? Why don't we start with Charlita?
I want to go to Hawaii. To Kauai in particular,
nice.
which is under many, many restrictions. So yes, Kauai.
Nice. How about you, Delia?
It's a little bit of a toss-up. I think I'm going to have to say Mexico. We have visited Mazatlan, and I feel it calling me right now.
Okay. And Poppy, how about you?
I'm going to say my very favorite place in the world, New Orleans.
Oh, yes. I've been there once and I loved it. I can't wait to go back. Awesome. Next question. What is your favorite thing to do by yourself? Let's start with Delia this time. Is it Delia or Delia? I'm sorry. I
It's
keep going back and
Delia.
forth. Delia. Okay.
Delia, yeah. That's a little hard because there are a lot of things I like to do by myself. Okay, I'm gonna pick two. I like to do yoga by myself without anybody bothering me at all. The other thing I like to do, I actually just like to watch Netflix, the shows that I want to watch and not the shows that my kids want to watch by myself. By myself is a very sacred, important place for me. And it almost doesn't matter what the thing is as long as I'm by myself.
Yeah.
Those two,
You're a
yoga
little
and Netflix.
nice. Okay. How about you, Poppy?
I know this is going to sound terrible, but I really enjoy cleaning the house by myself. It's one of my favorite things to do when the house is empty. And I also love to read, although often if I'm by myself and reading, I might also find myself taking a nap. So that's three things.
Great. How about you, Charlita?
Let's see. I would say meditate and pray and read inspirational, whether it's an inspirational book of some sort or inspirational article. But that solitude really helps to focus me just on that with no one around. So, yeah.
Awesome. And last of the lightning round questions. Going to start with you, Poppy. What is one important skill you think everyone should have?
One important skill, knife skills. It really makes being in the kitchen so much better when you know how to handle a kitchen knife. I'm sounding really homebody-ish, aren't I, tonight? Knife skills are really important.
It's fine. That's the life we're all living right now. So I appreciate that. How about you, Charlita?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's going to sound very tough. I would say, like the woman with words here, I would say for folks to just have common sense, but the common sense to be able to sometimes at the turn of the dime think critically about the decisions you make and strategically. And it doesn't have to, that sounds so formal, but sometimes we're faced with things that we need to be able to stay as calm as we can to think through, and having a level of common sense or thinking strategically, I think would serve one well.
Great. How about you, Delia?
I think building off of a little bit of what Charlita said, kind of a practical thing, I think that a life skill would be to, we say balance your checkbook, even though no one really keeps a checkbook anymore. But just being able to manage money. I've, been in different points in my life where I've had little to no money. I've been in debt a lot, and I've had more money and then less money. So it doesn't really matter how much money you have, but I think that being able to manage that and be responsible with that is really a incredibly important life skill. Something that I think I'm, trying to impart on my own children, that doesn't matter how much you have, but it's really important to be able to make really sound and responsible decisions for yourself with regards to money.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent skills that people should have, indeed. All right, so let's get started learning more about each of you. I'm going to start with Delia. And for anybody who's paying attention, I hope you noticed the theme tonight is education. All of my guests are educators, so it'll be great to have the different perspectives of everybody. Delia, you've had a lot of roles from teacher to administrator. So can you just tell us about your path that got you to education? A little bit
Sure.
of your story.
I don't know how far back you want me to go. I'll start. I'll start in grad school. So I maybe a little bit before that, as an undergraduate, I had an opportunity to work with kids, tutoring and teaching after school a little bit, and I really thought, I think this is for me. So I went into education and teaching. It was really important to me at the time, though, to really make sure that I connected with my community. So I got a B Cloud, which is a bilingual credential, so that I would be able to teach in Spanish and in English. So that was really, really important to me. So I went into teaching. I was a classroom teacher for, let's see here, 13 years. A site leader in different roles, organizing different committees. I was mostly in the primary grades, teaching second grade for a very long time.
At what school?
At Central in National City.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then, you do something for so many years, and I'm kind of that person that's like, okay, I need to learn more. I need to do something different. I love teaching. I knew I didn't want to leave education, but I was ready for something different. So I went back to school, in the evenings, and I think it was when my youngest, I think she might have still been nursing at the time. I went back to get a reading certificate. So I was a reading specialist. So my job in that role, I really helped struggling readers really kind of get up to grade level. So I did that for 2 years. And then while I was in that position, I thought, you never know what opportunities will present themselves. Why don't I go ahead and just get my administrative credential so that sometime in the future, when the door opens, I'll be ready. Something my mom always told me, she said, you just always have to be ready. The door will open and then you'll be ready. So just always be ready. Okay. So I did. I went to school for a year in the evenings. That was a hardship for the family too. It was really, really a team effort. Like my husband was such an integral part with, taking care of the kids that day that I was, gone till 9, 10 o'clock at night. So we did that. And then lo and behold, just like my mom said, the very next year, an opportunity presented itself. And I was fortunate that it was in the same district that I'd always worked. And so I became an assistant principal. This is now my 3rd year as an assistant principal. This year's a little bit unique because of, the COVID world that we live in, and some, adjustments that we've had to make in our school district. So I've had the opportunity to really work a little bit more closely with our special ed department. So I do a lot of work with district-wide with our special ed students. So I've worn many hats. I have that general education background and now the special education background, the literacy background. But really, it's all about the kids. And just this week, actually, I was thinking back to, I was in the equity conference here through San Diego County, and I was listening to the story of one of the speakers, and it really resonated for me, one of my original whys, which was really to think about students like my parents, my dad, who just didn't have anyone in that education role to guide him, really, and to be that person, outside the home that would motivate. You can do this. Look at all these opportunities. So I was reminded of that once again, and I love those moments as an educator where we can't forget why we started out doing what we did. And I appreciated that earlier this week, where that I was reminded of that again. And even though, it's challenging, all the work we do in education is challenging, and especially with the added layer of COVID and distance learning. But remembering that and keeping that close to what I do and why I do what I do. So that's a little bit of my path and where I am today.
That's great. And so, what school are you at now?
I am actually assistant principal of two schools.
Oh,
It is Rancho de la Nacion and Altoyon. They are side by side in National City.
okay. And those are elementary schools?
Elementary schools, yes. National is
Okay.
a K6 elementary school district. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So, can you tell us? You mentioned COVID a couple times. So, what has been the most difficult aspect of the pandemic with regard to the kids at your schools?
I would say to my husband a lot, I think COVID, if there were inequities or gaps that existed or, issues that existed before, I feel like COVID is like a bright shining light and has really amplified those gaps or those discrepancies. I think one of the biggest challenges for the community that I serve is with distance learning. You have a device, you're in your home or your grandma's house or wherever you are, and that requires a working device. It requires access to, a certain speed of internet. It requires a space, literally a space, hopefully a quiet space. It requires materials. It requires all these things that oftentimes the community that I work with in National City it struggles with that. And so for me as an administrator, it's been challenging to be able to sort of make those connections that I would have if we were in person. I sometimes can feel like, oh, my hands are tied because I'm doing this, I'm calling this person, I'm reaching out to this parent, this is what we can do for you, come and exchange your device, here's some low-cost internet, here are the materials that you need, and yet there's still some things that are impeding, that student learning that just is not the same as being in the classroom. So
Yeah.
just making the connection and ensuring that our kids truly do have access to a quality and equitable education. It's been challenging.
Yeah. So, I know that your kids and your family are extremely important to you. How are they dealing with COVID and learning at home, or if they are distance learning as well?
They are. Both of our girls are distance learning, and my husband teaches English, and he's teaching remotely. Actually, I'm the only one that leaves the house every day.
Mm,
It's we're kind of going back to that conversation about money. We've had less, we've had more. I personally am fortunate to be blessed with a space that my own girls can have access to those things. And my husband and I remind them all the time, you are so blessed because you have this and this, and literally it's a little space and a little, container of pencils, and you have your material and you have your device, but you have that in you, and you can access your education. Of course, having said that, it's not the same. I think one of the hardest things that has really, I can see it with both of my girls, is that social interaction.
mm,
I have one teenager who, teenagers, I've come to realize it literally is a part of their well-being and their normal healthy development to have that social interaction, and to not have that on a daily basis in person with kids. It's been hard. My youngest can sometimes do without people, but then when she does need people, she doesn't have the people. It's those moments of meltdown.
mm,
But we always try to bring it back to this place of gratitude, for our health, for our family being together and having a home. And then in those moments when we can and we're able to, let's go for a drive. we are so blessed to live where we live in San Diego, that the ocean is just, a few minutes away, and we get in the car and let's go look at the water and kind of bring ourselves back to a place of where we're okay, So
Yeah.
it's definitely been challenging, not a little bit different than the students I serve, but I know that if my children are going through this, all our children are going through this.
Yeah. And I know that you and your husband are very active in the community. So how do you exemplify that for your girls to show up for their community?
A lot of times in those, it's almost a hard question to ask because it's such a huge part of who we are as a family, that the conversations, the drives, the participation in what we do. It almost feels like second nature. Like, when we were watching the inauguration, my daughter said, "Mom, is it okay if I don't attend live class? Like, this is very important to me." And I don't know many 13-year-olds that would ask, "Mom, can I watch the inauguration?" And she was in tears because she was so moved. 4 years, finally, we're moving on. There's hope again. So I think that for us as a family, it's almost taken for granted, the conversations that we have about our community. One of the things that we always say to our girls is, remembering your history and remembering where you came from. The story of my parents as immigrants, the story of their dad, my husband as an immigrant, and his parents coming to this country. And we may be where we are right now, but really it's the story it's their story, right? We're here collectively because of them.
Right. That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to move on to Poppy now. So kind of similar to what I asked Delia, I'd like to hear kind of your pathway, your journey in education, because I know you also have had a lot of different roles, and now you work in the community college district. So tell us a little bit about your path.
Check in with me, Lizzie, because you're a little jumpy. So definitely let me know if are you hearing me clear?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. I like to begin my story, my career path, by sharing just briefly about my own educational journey, because they sort of bled one into the other. I had been in long-term foster care here in San Diego County. I aged out of foster care in 1989, before there were transition supports, before there was any sort of recognition that there was a cliff that one falls off of. And I was really incredibly fortunate to find my way to Grossmont College, which is a local community college, and bump into some caring administrators and faculty who encouraged me, and things that were somewhat taken for granted now. For example, it took me 7 years to earn a 2-year degree, and I paid cash for the whole 7 years because
Wow.
I was under the impression that I couldn't access financial aid because of my situation. So I share that part of my own journey because I think a lot about that experience, and layer that experience into my work every day, and particularly thinking about making every effort not to take for granted what students do or do not know, or should not know, because I understand that there are lots of reasons why we might not know what folks think we should. I went to work very soon as a student worker at Grossmont College in the disability support office there, and virtually never left. I just sort of summarize the last 30 years by saying that I really have worked in some context in higher education, almost always with direct oversight or next level oversight of disability support services. So in particular, helping students who have disabilities, adult students, navigate higher education in a way, hopefully, that they can have educational equity, which we know students with disabilities really lack. Like Delia, I somehow managed to earn an undergrad degree and was a single mom with 2 kiddos when I went back for my master's. And I was really intentional to choose a program that situated cultural competence and social justice mission at the center of that program. So I got my master's in educational counseling with an emphasis in cultural competency in my practice at San Diego State, the community-based block program. And then and that program was really dynamic and highly experiential. A lot of the kinds of opportunities that most folks who have a foster care experience in their history do not get. And I was very aware as a master's student how fortunate I was. But I hadn't yet integrated that part of my history or my identity. And so it wasn't until after I finished my master's that I started to realize that the very students that I was supporting were having similar experiences to my own, and that I started to be gentler with myself. I started to realize that things were hard for me because I had a hard path. And it was an interesting adult coming to awareness that ultimately, speaking of what do you do when you're alone, one Sunday morning after I had finished my master's, I was reading New York Times, and I read an article out of foster care into college. And the article said, if you have a foster care history, the likelihood of you ever making your way to college, or especially completing, was very, very small, minuscule, in fact. And so I thought, I'm going to go back to school and get my doctorate in that, and I'm going to study foster youth. And I was fortunate. I want to acknowledge Charlita, having been in education and had mentors and folks who were real people who led with heart in the way that I wanted to lead, as models for what was possible. And we lost Charlita in the midst of that. So I did go back to school, and I did research. My research, I looked at the success factors for former foster youth who had persisted to degree completion. So I wanted to ask that question, what went well, so that institutions could lift up those experiences and embrace those practices of the institutions that had well served these individuals. And it was, I think, one of the honors of my life. I heard deep, qualitative stories of 11 foster youth who had graduated from college. And I get to share those stories when I share my research, and I feel really fortunate for that. So I think that answers your question. I hope it does. That was a story for sure, but...
It's very interesting. I only knew just a small part of that, so I appreciate hearing more about it. So tell us, you work in the community college district now, right? What is your role there, and how has the pandemic affected the students you work with?
Sure. So I work for the San Diego Community College District, and my role is a director for disability support program services. Each campus within the district has a campus-based coordinator. So my role actually is very administrative, but I get to support the coordinators and their teams in supporting students and student success. And that feels like a dream come true. Um, I I love working in the community college context because I have so much heart in it because of my own history and the way that I've seen community college open doors and transform lives, unlike anything I've ever seen before. And I know, or at least I think I know, that my older daughter is with us today. So the other thing that I like to remind myself and share with others is that I get to see the next generation of the impact of community college in my own life. Hannah, who's 22, recently graduated from college and is applying to master's programs. So that part feels very personal and meaningful. How the pandemic has impacted students, I want to just echo what I heard Delia say earlier, which is those equity gaps that we knew definitively existed for students are simply amplified through the lens of this pandemic. And the things that we knew were problems before, like food insecurity, homelessness, resourcing problems, technology access, they just get bigger and brighter in the context of the pandemic. So what I feel proud about is that I think, at least in the San Diego region, I can say the community colleges have just risen to meeting those needs. Drive-through food pantries, parking lots with Wi-Fi access, access to technology solutions. It's just been really phenomenal to watch the equity work of the community colleges and to be a part of it.
Yeah, I've heard people say, for others like working in corporate jobs or whatever, that they now work from home, that, people with disabilities who were requesting that kind of accommodation in the past and were told no, and now suddenly everyone can do it. It's sort of like, oh, so we could have done that the whole time,
Yeah.
right?
Lizzie, your point is such a well taken one, and it's something that we've been hearing a lot from actually students and faculty and staff who have disabilities. That sort of bittersweet experience of finally being able to, achieve that accommodation that was necessary and supportive for their employment or their access to education, but only when it was absolutely necessary for everyone. And I think that is such a perfect metaphor for how we engage with folks who have disabilities and think in ways that are sometimes afterthoughts. Mm-hmm. So my hope as we think about the future is that we remember how easy it was, even though it's been tremendously difficult. But in the end, we made it work, and we can continue to do so.
Right. I totally agree. And last thing I want to ask you about is the Women's March. Can you talk a little bit about founding that? And I know it's coming up on Saturday. You're going to do it virtually. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, definitely. The first thing I want to acknowledge is that today is the 5th anniversary of the Women's March. So I should say, I guess, 5th anniversary. So this is our 5th year having a march or a march-like activity. Saturday, we'll be doing a virtual event we're calling Breaking Barriers, and it will include reflections from March speakers and performers from the last 4 years, some really interesting panels on racial justice and progress within the context of a pandemic environment. police oversight in San Diego is a big topic. We recently had a measure that passed related to oversight, so we'll be talking about that. 10 a.m. Saturday, womensmarchsandiego.org. You can register there for free. Thank you, Lizzie, for that. I want to acknowledge that I joined a community organizing meeting the Sunday following the Tuesday 2016 election of Donald Trump, because I was utterly in despair, like many people were. That organizing meeting was arranged by two women in San Diego who had started organizing separately and found each other on Facebook and convened a group that was led then by Norma Chavez Peterson of the ACLU in San Diego. I had a small part, accessibility, in that first march, and over the years established the organization and have served on the board. Last year I was March director, which was an incredible experience. I think for me, being a part of the Women's March has been my salvation. And I know that all of us have some lane that we were in throughout these last 4 years and longer that help us to garner meaning and make sense of the tremendously sometimes painful context in which we're existing. And really, Lizzie, your poem at the start, I just want to acknowledge, was so poignant and did a much better job articulating that pain than I really can. But yesterday, and I know everyone is clamoring about Amanda Gorman and how incredible she was in her recitation of her poem. One of the phrases jumped out at me, and it was, even as we grieved, we grew. And I think it came to me that was my feeling about the last 4 years, certainly and definitely about Women's March, that it was a place to pour energy and effort that felt as if I was having agency, and the stretch and the pain of that experience. And there certainly was some in this administration that we just left in the dust, is that notion of even as we grieved, we grew. I don't know, it resonated so deeply in my heart. So thank you for the opportunity to be here, Lizzie, and also to talk about the Women's March.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Appreciate all you had to say. Thank you so much. All right. And so last but of course not least, Dr. Shelton, Charlita Shelton. Similar to Delia and Poppy, please tell us a little bit about your pathway to education. You've also had a lot of different roles, so please tell us about them.
Sure thing. Well, first, I'd like to thank you, Lizzie, for this invitation to join in on this podcast and to be with my two distinguished colleagues here, and very much appreciate and enjoyed hearing your stories and really felt those stories in my heart. So I'll start out by saying that there is a YouTube video that anyone could Google and find, and that video is my story, from the ghetto to the presidency. And so my beginnings were very, very humble. If you would have asked me so many years ago that I would end up as an educational administrator in higher education, and knowing my stories from the 60s and 70s, you would say more than likely not. I would just be a statistic, just another Black woman who's dropped out of high school, so on and so forth. My family, I should say my siblings and our family lived in Chicago for a number of years. I was born in Chicago. And we lived in what's now gone, the Robert Taylor homes. So projects that were built primarily for BIPOC people, in this particular case, the South Side of Chicago, Black folks, by the first Daley administration. And there could be an entire podcast that I could talk a little bit about the interesting the Daleys in the Daley administration. It was a means to continue to segregate Chicago, blacks from the whites. And so we lived there in the early 60s. They were built brand new. So most of the black folks felt like, oh my goodness, it's just like a brand new apartment. But if you could imagine hundreds and hundreds of folks there, very, very poor, 16 floors. So that's people on people on people. And what ended up becoming one of the most dangerous places to live in Chicago in the 1960s. So we didn't have a lot of money, thus the reason why we qualified in the first place to live in a Robert Taylor homes. But my father had and my mother had just the good wisdom about themselves to say that they needed to move their family from Chicago to a little town called Pullman, Michigan, Southwest Michigan, a little less than a 2-hour drive from Chicago, but going right around the lake, right up to the Glove. And so we had family there and was able to acquire 40 acres of land. And so my father, although he worked at a chemical plant, he was also a farmer. He was a hog farmer. So we, and not having a lot of money, grew most of our own vegetables and fruits and things. And of course, raised pigs. And then there was a period of time that things got a little worse. Always, but I should mention, always a great deal of love relative to my parents and raising 6 kids. And we must have drove them crazy because we literally lived in a single wide trailer, a mobile home with 3 bedrooms and 8 people. And so we as kids, and maybe my siblings would attest to that, we had great times and joyous times, but that's like a lot of folks in a very small space and not a lot of money, And so my father ended up getting badly injured on his job and had to have a number of discs removed from his back. And back then, those weren't really easy surgeries, and you ended up having to wear a full back brace. So he could not work, as I recall, I might be getting it wrong, for at least more than a year. So we went on welfare. So that's commodity foods that's given to you from the government and food stamps. And so that's a bit embarrassing too, growing up. You've got friends in school and everything, and you're at the grocery store, and it's not, at least today, individuals are able to have cards, right? Like a credit card when they're, given that type of aid, but not then. So any of your friends who may be in line with their families, their parents, would see you pull out these food stamps and know that, you were on aid, that things were not well. But despite that, and interestingly enough, we all went on to pursue higher education. And it wasn't like my mother or father constantly talked about it, or as parents would say, well, you will finish high school and you will go to college. It wasn't a lot of conversation like that, although my mother and father, incredibly bright, only 10th grade education, but my mother was well read. So, she would talk about, schools like Vassar, and she probably liked Vassar because she loved Jackie Kennedy. And that's where Jackie Kennedy got her undergraduate degree, I believe. I might be corrected on that, was Vassar. But she was well read. But it was I'm second oldest of 6, and my oldest brother said, well, he's very, very bright. He said, I'm gonna go to college, because, really, let's be honest, we all wanted to get off that farm. Okay, we had to escape somehow. But I was an average student. I'm more, Lizzie, you've gotten to know me, Poppy, I'm incredibly social. And so really any type of environment like that, it's not about the books, it's about socializing. And so I thought to myself, well, if my brother can go and get into college, I can get into college. Barely able to get into Western Michigan University, as you see behind me, my alma mater, with a 2.2 GPA. But it changed my life. And I always say that higher education, education of any kind, I should say, is the great equalizer. It's the difference between being able to create a way, a means for you to have a career and do well and feel and know that you are that you have received wonderful education to do so. Without it, then you're left to other types of roles, obviously, in other professions that may not serve the individual well without the education. So, obviously, huge proponent in higher ed. That long story short of it, I enjoyed my undergraduate studies very much. I probably enjoyed the socializing of it most of all. I pledged a sorority. I'm a Delta, but loving Kamala Harris. She's an AKA Alpha Kappa Alpha, pledged at Howard, and that's the first founded Black sorority in this country. And Delta Sigma Theta was the second. So we always have this rivalry. But I'm very proud of our vice president and the pearls that she wears, her 20 pearls. The 20 pearls. If you know, I'm wearing my pearls. That 20 pearls represent for the Alpha Kappa Alphas. They're 20 the 20 founding mothers of that sorority at Howard University. So that the pearls that she wears always has great significance. But having said that, I thought about what would be next for me and had to figure that out. I graduated from Western in 1980. It was the end of Carter's administration. It was the beginning of Reagan's administration. The country's in a bit of a recession. My major was communications. So my thought in my mind, and it was radio and television production, but then also the oral interpretation of literature, so on and so forth. But I thought in my mind, I could be Oprah and I could be the first Oprah after my degree. That simply did not happen. And last time I checked, it happened for Oprah, and she's doing well. So I thought, well, I got to kill some time here. I need to kill some time. So bright Charlita here decided to enlist in the United States Marine Corps. So no, not the Army, not the Air Force, not the Navy. Let's just go right for the Corps. And that 4 years changed my life as well. So I went into the Marine Corps as an enlisted person with an undergraduate degree. And that is not typical because I was not able to qualify to become an officer because of my SAT scores. So I have never done well in terms of, aptitude test at all. Another story when you start talking about individuals who can excel in other ways, but not in testing, and talk about inequities relative to testing. I could go on and on about that. But the point being is that was fine that I would go enlisted because I could spend this time in the Corps and serving. And while I was in the Corps, I didn't have a great appreciation for being a Marine. I have far more appreciation of what I learned and the people I met during that time. That was incredible. But fact being is that I knew that I wanted more in terms of higher education, and I landed a few years later and after the Corps in San Diego at a small little college, Kelsey Jenny College. Most people don't know that Kelsey Jenny College was founded probably a year or so before San Diego State University. It was a technical college. So basically, helping individuals to complete their associate degrees in paralegal studies, legal secretarial studies, administrative assistant studies, accounting. And I loved that job so much. And a good dear friend of ours that Lizzie knows and probably would know, her name is Charlene Dackerman. She hired me. She hired me 30 years ago to be the assistant dean of our evening programs. And that's how I got started in higher education. And Charlene and I are dear friends, will always be forever dear friends. And I'm indebted to her because she believed in me. I had my undergraduate degree, of course, spent time in the Corps. I was out in DC for a while after I got out of the Corps, but believed that I could do that work, though I had no formal experience. And then from there, things just took off. And listen, if you want to do well in higher education level, meaning from the perspective of being a higher education administrator, you have to continue your studies. And so I did later on. Graduated with a master's degree in educational administration from National University there in San Diego. And then pursued more because at that time I was moving from university to university and knew that it would be time that I would have to pursue a PhD. So any of you out there that are incredibly intimidated about seeking a terminal degree, don't be. You have to believe in yourself and have wonderful folks who will surround you and support you. The folks that are around and support you will help you get through this because it could feel like a very intimidating process to pursue a PhD or pursue a terminal degree. And I did, and it proved well. So I love to tell this story. When I completed, I have a master's degree and a PhD from Fielding Graduate University. When I finished my PhD, 6 months later, I became president of a university. That's the difference. Wow. Now, do you need to be very savvy relative to your contacts and who you network with and who's your mentor and who you spend your time with to pursue these goals? Yes, but it was about 6 months later. And so I'm happy to say that, I have served as president of University Rockies. I was also president for a period of time of Argosy University in Atlanta, Georgia, executive director of the Dallas Nursing Institute, and now find myself here at Gonzaga University and serving as the special consultant to the president, but also as, who knew, I began as the Pandemic Response Task Force Chair, and now I'm the COVID-19 Compliance Officer. I do not have a background that would be anywhere near medical or even understanding infectious disease. But I will say that with all of your experiences in life, and if you add the portion that involves higher education, and then if you just have a little common sense about yourself and you're organized and you think strategically, there are many things that we can do that we would figure that we cannot do. That's my long-winded answered story to you, Lizzie. Maybe some things you didn't know.
There was some things I didn't know. Thank you so much for sharing. We have about 7 minutes left, so Charlita, if you could just quickly tell us how your students are doing with the pandemic. Are they on campus? Are they distance learning? Is it a hybrid? What's going on up there?
Yes, we decided back in the late part of spring that we would bring our students back, Gonzaga, to in-person learning. But it is hybrid. So we do have in-person learning, but then also students who study remotely. They can do both and be right there on campus. For instance, we had in the fall about 2,500 students on campus. And then we had a portion of our students that decided to go exclusively remotely. So we needed to prepare ourselves to bring them back to campus, understanding this infectious disease that have changed many people's lives in this past year. We were able to do so, I would say, relatively successful. And what I mean by that is our job's really to ensure the mitigation of the virus on campus. And how do we do so? With college students between the ages of 18 to 22 at a residential campus. Our infection rate, for the most part, in the fall semester fell under 1.9%. So we had a very, very low infection rate, and that's all about the planning. The students did well in that, and I attribute the students and their attitudes to really wanting to be back at Gonzaga or start their studies at Gonzaga, physically being there, and they knew that they needed to follow protocols. And they did a really good job at doing so. Was there sadness behind that going back and being able to physically be at a Gonzaga basketball game, go Zags, not being able to interact in the way that they would be used to at our field house or or Hemmingson is where most of our students gather for meals and things. Very difficult. And some depression a little bit with that. I think that whether it's from the K-12 system to college, there's a little depression when you're put in a circumstance that's so different and you don't receive that type of social contact that you need to. So all in all, moving into spring, and we see how we'll do the spring.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your stories of how you got to education, and they're all so different and yet all very similar too. They were things that changed your life about education that made you want to do that for a living. So I really appreciate all your stories. Before we go, I'm just going to ask you one more question. Tell me, what is one big hope you have for this year, for 2021? Poppy, how about we start with you?
I keep getting invited to begin, and then I'm in awe of the answers that come following. One big hope. Well, yesterday, President Biden signed 17 executive orders beginning to bring the United States up to where we were perhaps 4 years ago. One of the orders that he signed related to family reunification, children who were separated at the border, the southern border, with their families.
That's right.
And I know this is big, and I'm getting teary just about to deliver this sentence, but I think if I had one wish, it would be that at the end of 2021, we and the government summoned all of our capacity and creativity to reunite those kiddos with their families. I don't think it's too much to ask that we can do it if we're determined enough to do so. And for me, there's a lot, no shortage in that list of 17 things that felt, heart-filling and optimistic. But that's my wish for this year, and I'm going to be watching really closely to see what unfolds.
Yeah. Thanks, Poppy. Charlita, how about you?
That we mitigate this virus, COVID-19, in 2021 to the degree that vaccines will be available for all people who are willing to take it. But we need at least 70% of our population to receive that shot in the arm, and to be able to get to Christmas Day where we're not concerned about getting on an airplane and flying to see a loved one, because we know that we've done the best job that we could possibly do mitigating the virus and making sure that everyone can receive that vaccine. That's my hope.
That's a good one. Delia, how about you?
I think I'm going to have to, again, build off of what Charlita said. Definitely two things I would say is, one is I hope that in 2021 we continue to be hopeful, and that and we just hold on to that light of hope, because it's a new day, but we still have so much work to do, and just continue to stay hopeful, first and foremost. On a more sort of practical level, obviously COVID, but for me that means seeing kids. I can't tell you how hard and almost sad it is to go to my office every day at school and there are no kids. There's something truly saddening about being at an elementary school without kids. My wish for 2021 is for kids to be able to return in a safe and what we would call a normal setting. Children need to be in school, and we need to hear children's voices again. We need to hear their voice and see their laugh and see them play. I really hope in 2021 that we're able to, as Charlita said, get this vaccine and get this pandemic under control, for me personally, so that kids can be back in classrooms.
Well, let's hope that all comes true. Thank you all so much. My guests again have been Delia Arancibia, Poppy Fitch, and Charlita Shelton. Thank you all so much. Please come back next month. The show will be on February 18th, and my guests will be Sarah Becerra, Lisa Sanders and Karen Hayes, and Haley White. So please come back, and we'll see you next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Lizzie.
for having us,
Take
Lizzie.
care, y'all. All of you.